Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Lane Zucker, founder and CEO of Impact Entrepreneur, and welcome to our webinar, Closing the Disability Wealth Gap Through Venture Investment with Regina, Kline. And a special welcome to all those members of the Impact Entrepreneur Network attending this webinar. Impact Entrepreneur is a large global network of systems-minded change-makers, entrepreneurs, investors, scholars, and students of social and environmental innovation who believe that this work needs to be done within a transformational framework. We build companies, we invest in them, we study and teach about them, but we also understand that we have to collaborate to build a new business paradigm and ecosystem that functions with a very different brain chemistry around those businesses, what we might call an impact economy, in order to find an authentically sustainable way forward. So if you agree with this perspective and are not yet a member, join the network. It is free. The only entry fee is your commitment to the business of change. This webinar is part of two series that we offer to network members and others. The first of which this webinar is a part is called Luminarius, and its theme is Fireside Chats. The second series is called Building an Impact Economy, and it is composed of topical panel discussions. Selections from past programs can be found on our magazine's website, as well as on our YouTube channel, Impact Entrepreneur TV. And be aware that you can become a premium member of Impact Entrepreneur and get priority admission to all upcoming live programs, as well as the access to the entire archive of well over 100 past programs, as well as more ways to engage with our global community. You can find information on all these benefits, read our magazine articles, subscribe to our newsletter, and to Impact Entrepreneur TV, learn about our upcoming live programs, all on our website, which is www.impactentrepreneur.com. Okay, now I'm very pleased to introduce our program and our guest. When we were developing the departments and navigation for our online magazine, the subject of disabilities as a full department in the magazine didn't arise in our conversations with our team and advisory boards. In addition to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, our magazine is the first to be explicitly anchored to the SDGs. We identified 17 other related issue areas, which we organized under Impact Economy. Disabilities was not one of them. Since we launched the magazine over a year ago, I have heard from several people who asked, why didn't we include disabilities in the list of issue areas? Well, I looked into the question of how the impact investing space is grappling with disabilities and frankly, did not see very much activity at all. In order to develop a section of the magazine, you need to have confidence that you can fill it with useful content over time. Well, so it is indeed a bit strange when you think about it, that disabilities is not something that comes up regularly when reviewing research around impact investor priorities. After all, as we noted in the description for this program, according to the United Nations, 1.5 billion people globally live with disabilities, which is almost 20%, 1 in 5 of the world's population. Nearly 2/3 of the world's working age persons with disabilities are not employed. All in all, it is estimated that the global GDP loses approximately 1.9 trillion, that's with a T, annually due to exclusion of people with disabilities in the workplace. So the investment case for investing in innovation at the nexus of disability and tech could not be stronger, yet the disability market is massively underserved and undercapitalized. There are more than 2.5 billion people who would benefit from assistive products. People with disabilities, alongside their friends and family, control over 13 trillion in global disposable income. The US assistive tech market will be valued at 26 billion by 2024. The global disability community is expected to increase from 1.5 billion people to 3.5 billion people by 2050 as populations age and the rate of non-communicable diseases rise. So given the scope and urgency of the challenges surrounding disabilities, I have been looking for a way for Impact Entrepreneur to begin to focus on the topic. And today's guest gives us just that opportunity. Enable Ventures, the fund she founded, is the first impact venture fund dedicated to closing the disability wealth gap and while achieving competitive market rate returns. It is supported by Smart Job, a platform to attract disability deal flow and support and build disability innovation, the disability innovation ecosystem. Enable Ventures is part of the Sorensen Impact Platform of funds. So let's begin this conversation with someone who has spent much of her professional career focused on helping those with disabilities. Now, allow me to introduce our guest to you. Regina, or Gina, Kline is an investor, entrepreneur, civil rights lawyer, and thought leader dedicated to building the future of work by advancing the rights and interests of people with disabilities as innovators, workers, business owners, and consumers. She is the founder and managing partner of Enable Ventures, as I mentioned, the first impact venture fund dedicated to closing the disability wealth gap. She is also founder of Smart Job, a platform to attract disability deal flow and support and build disability innovation ecosystem, and a 2022 recipient of a Clinton Global Initiative Commitment to Action. Previously, Gina led a successful career as a civil rights attorney, which included working at the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, where she successfully led efforts to dramatically improve working conditions and the employment of people with disabilities. Gina, welcome. Can you come off mute and say a quick hi?
Thank you so much, Lori. It's such a pleasure to be with you, and I'm humbled by your introduction.
Thanks so much for being here. So let's get into our conversation. It's become my practice, as those who have been on our other fireside chats will know, my first question is the same to all our guests. And it's really to get to know you a little bit, to share one or two personal experiences as they relate to the professional work that you're doing in the space. So can you share an early experience? It might be in childhood or in school or early professional work that inspired you onto the path of impact?
See, Lori, I heard you might do that, so I'm ready. I'm prepared. You know, I come from a family. I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia, in the Washington, D.C. area, in privilege. But I understood so deeply the stories of my family as being one of immigration, entrepreneurship, and grit. I had Italian grandparents who came to escape Mussolini, came to a small town in Western Pennsylvania, sponsored by other Italian immigrants. With a few dollars to his name, my grandfather became a contractor in his own business and built in Capra-esque quality, the school, the bank, the health clinic, and understanding that this is a country that is unrivaled in its approach to upward mobility and economic opportunities. And that was part of my understanding critically about who I was in childhood. On the other side of my family was a grandfather who ran a psychiatric hospital in Western Pennsylvania. And he was not admitted to medical school in the United States because he was Jewish, and actually received a medical degree in Scotland. When he died abruptly in his early 50s, he left my grandmother with 9 children. And it's a reverse Horatio Alger story. There was riches to rags. And my father and several of my uncles were able to access education because of an endowment left by Milton Hershey. And the chocolate money, as our family says, is what actually gave our family economic opportunity. And several of my uncles paid for college. My father was a championship athlete and went to college on scholarship. But those types of understandings about mobility, entrepreneurship, scrapping, following your ideas is something that was baked into the DNA of childhood. When I was a newly minted college graduate, I found myself in with a group of people that idealistically wanted to do something about poverty in the United States. And it was the late 90s. It was early 2000s, late 90s. And it was the time when we were talking about welfare reform in the United States. And we were young and idealistic and thinking that we could do something about it. And there were these two student leaders in universities named Kirsten Lodel and Brian Kreider, who led a student movement to train some of us to help people in low and moderate income neighborhoods who lived in poverty to find jobs. And one of the most astonishing things, my first job out of college was helping other people find jobs. The naivete of that is apparent, but one of the lessons learned from that was that I was so young that I didn't have any cynicism yet baked into my DNA, that there was a suspension of disbelief in other people and a belief in other people's skills and talents wherever they lied. I remember that the internet was a new tool, and we were able essentially to find jobs, locate employment and economic opportunities for people who were homeless and living in public housing, and connect them to opportunity through solutions that were lying around, and through networks and social capital that we as young students that had just left university possessed. And it was seeing an individual who lived in a low and moderate income neighborhood who had never driven a car say that he wanted to see the rest of the United States, and believing in him, because I had not been trained in the cynicism of adulthood yet, that he could actually become a trained CDL certified truck driver, and accessing resources through social capital and financial capital for him to get a CDL driver's license, and receiving postcards through nearly the rest of my 20s from different states from this gentleman as he drove a commercial truck across the United States. And so it was those individual experiences in working before becoming a lawyer and realizing that an organized belief in other people and leveraging social capital and paying privilege forward could have really defining and material benefits to people around me. I went to law school to try to access more systems reform. In knowing individuals in the work that I was doing, I wanted to understand the systems that wrapped around people, and that really it engendered inequality and needed reform. I, right out of law school, clerked for a judge that was a formative player in the Mississippi Freedom Summer and the Civil Rights Movement. And here she was, a judge in a criminal court in the District of Columbia. And we were working on a criminal mental health diversion court, one of the first in the country, that was identifying the critical health needs of people who were criminally involved and had serious mental illness, and trying to better understand how to reduce recidivism and improve community health and keep people out of cycles of poverty and incarceration. And this judge saw that as a formative and crucial front in the civil rights movement. And when we saw people with serious mental illness who had not been taken into a point of entry to the healthcare system and were finding points of entry through our court, when we saw people with serious mental illness who were connected with the supports they needed to work, we saw that that was a crucial and critical social determinant of health, and it reduced their levels of incarceration and dramatically reduced recidivism. And my takeaway was that economic participation, just like my grandfather's as an entrepreneur in this country, economic participation is a critical and crucial link to public health, and to our society and to the strength of our democracy. And that landed me eventually at the front door in my career to the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department.
Thank you. A set of very poignant stories, and I really appreciate how you tie them together, and in a way, and I want to continue a little bit more on that trajectory. So yeah, so you went from law school and these other earlier experiences into law, and you've been very focused in your law career on protecting the rights of individuals with disabilities. And so I'd love it if you could share just a little background on that work and a couple of the major takeaways that you drew from those roles that you've had.
Yes, and for those that don't know it, I mean, we are one of the countries in the world, one of the few countries in the world that actually has a system where we take taxpayer dollars and we pay lawyers to be on the front lines of safeguarding our civil rights in this country, and that's the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department. It has been known as essentially the moral compass of the Justice Department, which is the enforcement of our civil rights statutes. And so it was very humbling to join, essentially some of the most brilliant lawyers in the US who are civil rights lawyers at the Civil Rights Division at Justice. When I got there as a young attorney, I joined great mentors and colleagues in the enforcement of a Supreme Court decision that was written by Ruth Ginsburg. And it was essentially the Brown versus Board of Education of the disability rights movement. It's called Olmstead versus LC. And this is essentially, Lori, what it says, which is people with disabilities have a fundamental right to live fully in the community, to be fully integrated into the mainstream of American life. And that means at work, in play, where you go to school, where you live. And we've had a long history of institutional segregation in our country. And, the discourse in this country, people understand about the civil rights movement by and large, and they understand about housing segregation and other types of segregation that involved Jim Crow era laws in the United States. The interesting thing is that people with disabilities that's a later statute in the civil rights, in the canon of civil rights movements. The ADA was enacted in 1990. Ruth Ginsburg wrote a decision that is the Brown v. Board, that separate is not equal for people with disabilities, in 1999. And the history of separate housing, separate work, and separate facilities still reverberates across the disability community. And my mandate with my colleagues at the Justice Department was to apply this very crucial and landmark Supreme Court decision to where people work. And people with disabilities across the United States, even in the 21st century, my time at the Justice Department and today, we're still working in separate facilities, earning sub-minimum wages on the basis of their disabilities, performing rote manual work in workshops, separating screws, sorting buttons, recycling trash. There are other people, there's the vast majority of people with disabilities who don't work in that high degree of economic segregation. Still, the vast majority of disability labor force participation is in a disproportionate number of jobs with manual skills. And so my litigation and the work that I was working on at the Justice Department involved why and how state governments, federal, state, and local authorities were taking incentives with Medicaid funding and service system support for workforce development and running those economic incentives into separate, segregated work settings. And that is essentially the way that those systems have been run for quite some time in the United States. But this is not special to the United States, that people with disabilities across the world have been separated from the labor force. And when you mentioned at the top of the introduction, nearly 2/3 of working age adults in the world with disabilities are in fact not employed. What we know, Lori, to be true is that nearly half of people that live in long-term poverty in the United States identify with disability. And there's a nearly $2 trillion hole in the global marketplace where labor and talent from the disability community should be. What this work led me to was vindicating the rights of thousands of people in various states in landmark cases to try to access meaningful, competitive, integrated employment in the mainstream of the economy and upwardly mobile jobs, saying that the people who had been channeled towards separate work, towards the artifice of work, but without any of the economic benefits, not only could compete in the mainstream economy, but deserved and were legally entitled to the services and supports they needed to thrive, the technology, the infrastructure, the caregiving that they needed to compete. And what we knew to be true then, and we know many of my colleagues know now, that demography is destiny. There is a rising group of people with disabilities in the world that have only known two realities. They were born after the ADA and came into the world with civil rights, and they were born during a technological revolution where access to technology has become prolific at a lower price point, that there are commercial solutions, and that they want to compete in the mainstream economy and competitively. What I realized, I was sitting in a deposition, and I had a moment where there was a debate. I mean, there was we were litigating the issue of whether my client was employable. And my client stepped away for a little while, and he came back. And this was a client that earned sub-minimum wages. And I said, "Where did you go?" He said, I have a car, so I drove a guy. Guy asked me for a ride, and I charged him $100. And I just came back, and he said, "Gina, that's more than I make in a month." Now, here is a person who is an entrepreneur. And yet, when I evaluated the infrastructure around that person and so many people like him, that there were tyrannically low expectations of public systems that channeled him into a job that was separated from the mainstream economy, earning sub-minimum wages, that technology, access to resources, and a suspension of disbelief would have allowed him essentially to enter the economy and do any number of jobs. And so that is where I began to evaluate as a trial attorney that what is in essence the next phase of civil rights, and what are rights without remedies? Where is the infrastructure around the solution? Lori, nearly 1 in 9 people with disabilities that have a technology need, only 1 out of 9 actually has the technology they need today. But yet there is a multi-billion person demand for those inclusive, accessible technologies, not in a vacuum, but to get people to work, to get people into the mainstream of the economy to participate. And so that my legal career really led me to a reckoning that I wasn't leaving the law behind when I'm entering life as an investor, but it's really that this is the next phase of achieving not just equality, which is afforded when you vindicate rights under a statute as profound as the ADA, but equity and economic justice. And a lot of my colleagues from the civil rights establishment understand that we've only started the conversation about how thou shalt not discriminate. The next phase is really about an alignment between where resources live in the world and whether they're attached to people who've been underrepresented and now have rights that they are exercising.
I really appreciate the context. It's rare in our webinars to get such a full, expansive, deep, sophisticated view of what we're talking about. So let's build on that. I want to move into your current roles, but before we do that, I think it would be useful to talk about the word disabilities. What is a disability, and how does the definition or definitions of disability relate to and impact the field that you've been working in and that you're now in law and now also in investment?
Well, we often get to ask this question. I think it's a very important one in framing conversations. And, we believe that disability is the human experience. It is us. If you don't have a disability today, you are likely to age into one at some point in your lifetime. People with disabilities include people with chronic conditions, people with physical, mental, emotional, intellectual disabilities. And, we as a society have often experienced disability and not named it. When we talk to enterprise employers, they will report to you, Lori, that nearly 90% of employees with disabilities at work never tell their employer that they have a disability. And when we're talking about the 1.5 billion people in the world that do identify with disability, I'll say something provocative, but it's an undercount. Because those are people that strongly identify with that label. This is the human experience, and this is the gamut of what it means to experience diversity among people, people who think differently than each other, people with a different baseline of needs and barriers that they need to remove in their life, and it is truly, our population. We often have sort of a myopic view of DEI in our world. We deal with gender and we deal with race and we work with disability over here. And what we are experiencing is that disability has the potential to be the front door to DEI. Because people with disabilities are women, people with disabilities are people of color, there is great geographic and ethnic diversity in disability and heterogeneity in type of disability. But the commonality today is that there has been a lack of capital, a lack of access to capital and upward mobility in this group across disability and across that great diversity. The other commonality is that when we look at the poverty dashboard in the world, and we try to identify the most economically vulnerable people in America, for instance, or the world, they are people with disabilities who carry those other social identity groups. They are women and people of color who have disabilities. When we add the social identity lens together, the statistics on economic vulnerability go up. And that is something that as an investment community, we should be thinking about holistic solutions about how to invest in real people with complex social identities and reach people who've really truly been overlooked by capital.
Okay, thanks for that background on what disability is. Let's now focus on your two current roles. Founder of Smart Job LLC, which you founded in, if I believe I'm correct, in 2020, and Enable Ventures, which you launched this year. So can you just give a brief overview of each, and then we'll dig into especially Enable a little bit more?
Definitely. In 2020, I left a partnership in a law firm and started Smart Job to try to identify and systematically understand the disability market for solutions, those remedies that I was coveting and that many of my colleagues and many of my friends with disabilities were coveting. And Smart Job created a scout program to identify the earliest stage companies in the world that are working on solutions for the disability marketplace, and to back and support disability tech accelerators and incubators. There is this amazing thing that happened in recent history, Lori, where leaders in countries around the world started to realize that there's such tremendous built-up demand for tech and for inclusive tech, and not waiting for the largest companies in the economy to send tech down the supply chain to people with disabilities, but actually building it from the bottom up to find product market fit with communities. At Smart Job, we're backing accelerators and incubators that are iterating with the community and that are working on whether things have efficacy with various disability groups and people in the community. That is what we announced at the Clinton Global Initiative, which is a Smart Job and Enable Ventures effort to support 11 accelerators in 8 countries that are led by leaders with disabilities and those working in the community around disability tech. And of course, all of this led me, and sort of building on that really important foundation, I have such a unique opportunity, and we could talk about it later, to work with the Sorensen Impact platform. But we were able in 2022, in responding to where there was market demand, to launch a Series A venture capital market rate, double bottom line impact venture firm in Enable Ventures.
Okay, so let's talk more about that. Enable Ventures. How does Enable define the market that you're addressing with your fund? What is the market opportunity from an investment standpoint? What is novel about your investment strategy at Enable? And why do you think hasn't the impact investing space focused on this area in the past? That's a few questions. Hopefully
you fit a lot in there.
You're a lawyer. You can handle that.
I'm very happy to answer your questions. So the market opportunity, as you mentioned at the top, is a tremendously large underserved white space in the global marketplace. I think it's important to understand, just from a technology perspective, when that 1 in 9 figure that I gave you a minute ago, that one out of 9 people with disabilities with an urgent technology need actually have the assistive technologies that they want, which means that there is this tremendous built up demand globally for inclusive and accessible technologies, turnkey commercialized solutions. And I think that you said, why is your strategy different? And I think this is a crucial question, because the marketplace that we're intending to serve are not people and founders with disabilities and those working in concert with the disability community. They're not founders who do not believe that there is a robust commercial market for their solutions, nor do they believe that they will be serving a small total addressable market of a niche subpopulation. Disability is a majority minority in the world. It's the largest minority in the world. If disability were a country, it is an economy the size of China. Let's pause. And so you say to me, Lori, why haven't we done this before? But think about when people came of age with civil rights. It was 1990. And so it's about time. But now there is a strategy that it doesn't involve, us making up a strategy. It is people like our fund and those in the world who see what's coming, which is a radical built up demand from a consumer base that has $8 to $9 trillion annual disposable income, an economy, the 3rd largest economy in the world, with a majority minority, with 1.5 billion and growing in terms of population size. And I think during COVID, we really experienced a collective vulnerability that made us understand that not only is the disability population growing, but perhaps there's some wisdom in this group of people in designing the products and services that we all need as a consumer base going forward. But when we find that people with disabilities design, they are stress testing products and services for the universality of their applications. And when you say, what do you mean by universal design? What they're doing is trying to figure out how to design consumer products and services to exclude the least number of people. And time again, when we look at this population with this built up consumer demand, responding to consumer needs and stress testing products for how inclusively designed they are, we understand that they have a unique capability, skillfully, to access not just a disability subpopulation, but much of the consumer base in the market. And that many of these products and services that solve a disability need have knock-on effects to the general consumer market. And I'm not making it up, because we have a long 100-year history of this. Everyone, 100+ year, everyone from Alexander Graham Bell to Thomas Edison, who were both responding in their inventions to disability-related inspiration. Alexander Graham Bell had a deaf mother and a deaf wife, and that is why he was so interested in acoustics and sound. With everything from that to sliding doors, cruise control, SMS texting, the backbone of the internet. There was disability design and innovation at the core of those advancements. And it wasn't that it was an accident, a coincidence, that disability has taught the world and the consumer base about inclusive design and finding, problems that are, endemic to the experience of disability, but also finding solutions that solve those problems, but have really direct knock-on effects to the rest of society. And so, where we are with our differentiation in the market as a fund is that we see that as a superpower, that has the potential, the market potential, to reach consumers well beyond the disability subpopulation and to allow people with disabilities to lead in society, in the creation of the future of tech, building technology that has people at its heart, has ethics in mind in actually producing substantial social benefit from tech, as opposed to producing tech and then retrofitting it for application to various subpopulations.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the Sorensen Impact Group, which is an important partner in your new fund, if I understand it. Why do you think that Sorensen Impact Group saw the value in the approach that you're taking, while others that you might have been speaking to might not have seen the value? I'm aware, for example, that Jim Sorensen, who's going to be a guest on our webinar series in 3 weeks, that Jim has some significant background in the disability space. So maybe if you can speak about that relationship and maybe add a little background about his work in the space too, that would be great.
Yeah, I don't want to scoop Jim on his webinar, so he might get razzed a little for telling his story.
We've got plenty of other stuff to talk about. Don't worry.
Okay, great. Well, and Jim is such a tremendous champion and leader in impact space. But what so many people don't know about Jim is that Jim's inspiration in becoming an impact investor actually began with an origin story that involved disability. And I want to get to that in a second, but I can't pass up the chance to tell you about what it was like to leave a law practice as a partner, to quit essentially on some kind of crazy, hairy dream of becoming an investor and being a woman with domain expertise in the field of disability, but wanting to enter the venture capital space. Where, Lori, as you know, less than 2% of deployed capital goes to women in VC, and less than 11% is invested in women fund managers in venture capital. And so, the idea of even being involved was a disruptive rebellion. The number of no's, I thought my first name was No for a while there. And but I was so engaged because and with a kitchen cabinet of some brilliant advisors and champions from across the disability community, I was so engaged in the idea that the community was here for this, that this was a time, this had to happen, that there is that generation knocking on an open door essentially to join the economy and to buy products and services that will improve their lives. And but after a while, you just keep going and you're thinking, am I crazy? And then I met Jim and Jim's incredible team at the Sorensen Impact Group and his incredible vision that he actually wanted to de-risk people like me, who are domain experts, who bring access to unaddressed markets and opportunities, but who really need the leverage and the support of a committed platform like his to be doing this work. Jim's story is quite remarkable. In the year 2000, during the first bubble burst in Silicon Valley, he was working on a technology that was video compression technology, a precursor to FaceTime. I don't know if he'll describe it that way to you. But essentially, he was burning through money during this crisis. And he had a deaf brother-in-law who said to him, there's really something to that technology that would have profound impacts for millions of people who are deaf and hard of hearing to be able for the first time to communicate by telephone with an ASL interpreter with a hearing person. And Jim made a hard pivot with his company and the technology, and ended up taking a considerable amount of market share in video relay service, which FCC at the time was reimbursing per connected minute. And he connected millions of deaf and hard of hearing people with communication for the first time. And as a result of that, which became one of the largest private equity deals in Utah history at the time, as a result of that company's success, people who had access to video relay service were 4 times more likely to be employed than people who are deaf and did not have access to video relay service. And I think that showed Jim that this does not need to be a trade-off. The idea of a profitable business enterprise, in that situation, it was private equity, that there was something that was causally connected between his revenue model and the number of minutes that people were actually communicating, that impact was tied to the success of that company. And I'll let Jim tell it, but I think that was a key inspiration for him in becoming a leader in impact investing in the following years. When we met, there was a crucial and joint commitment that disability is an unaddressed part of the market and has a profound potential to drive both profit and purpose across the world and in the United States venture market.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to, in just a moment, get to talk about some of the companies you're looking to invest in. But first, I want to ask you, you said that through Enable's work, a quote, once in 100-year problems are being solved. And I picked up on that, and I was just wondering, were you referring when you said that to the effects of the COVID pandemic? Obviously, that's exacerbated a lot of kind of longstanding issues, or were you referring also to a broader sense of century-old problems? Can you explain?
Yes, I think for many years, for a good long time, there have been brilliant inventors and founders in the disability market who are coming up with solutions. And there's been absolutely conspicuous absence of capital investment and access to commercial capital. What we're seeing now with the confluence of capital, availability of capital, social innovation, and civil rights, and not to mention technological innovation, is that we're seeing that some of the problems, and I say problems, I should say barriers, like, for instance, wayfinding and geospatial navigation for people who are blind. People who are blind have been using a white cane for navigation for over a century. But yet we're seeing in the disability market today, people who are looking at various solutions using LiDAR, using algorithms, using iPhone technology, using geospatial mapping to edify and make more accurate wayfinding. They're not doing it in a vacuum. They're working shoulder to shoulder with the organized blind movement to find these solutions to make a barrier like that to employment and to economic participation, to remove those barriers. When I think of once in 100-year problems, I think about less than 10% of people who are blind who have access, who access and read Braille. Braille is expensive. Printing Braille around the world and distributing it is hard. And yet there are refreshable Braille displays that are a piece of digital technology that until now have cost $12,000 per unit because there hasn't been access to investment capital to scale and sustain at a lower price point, access to digital technology. Reading, these are once in 100-year problems that have direct imports to the fact that, the vast majority of people who are blind, regardless of their educational status, are disconnected from work and are underemployed today. And yet there are solutions that are entering the marketplace that can remove barriers. One of my dearest mentors from the blind community was telling me that he really wished that he knew what a Watson-Crick DNA strand was. That textbooks, there has been a lack of access to visual imagery. And so entering the medical professions has been difficult for the organized blind movement because of the lack of access to Braille. But now we're seeing across the world a movement towards tactile Braille to show imagery through raised pins on a tactile Braille machine, which will, if done correctly, will dramatically improve access to science, STEM, medical education, exactly for solving for that problem. So that's what we mean about epic problems that will be solved. The knock-on effects are clear, not just to those disability subpopulations, but to all of society. And I'm happy to talk about that at some point in this conversation.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've got about 8 minutes before we're going to start looking at questions from the audience in the queue. We've got some already in the queue. Upvoting has happened, so please continue to put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat, but in the Q&A, and also look at the questions that are in the Q&A. And if you really kind of want one question to be asked and answered, give it a thumbs up, okay? That's an important role that you, the audience, plays in our webinars. Gina, can you give us an idea of the, I know you're limited in the kind of the detail that you can give here, but the kind of companies that you're looking to invest in. What does innovation look like? I mean, you've given some examples, but I'm interested in even more here. What does innovations look like? What kind of measurable impact are you seeking in your investments? Is your pipeline focused on companies that are providing products and services for the disabled, employing and creating jobs for the disabled, or both? Sounds like it might be both, but I'd love you to kind of, where have you arrived as you think about your pipeline there? And what stage of company is in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, so Enable Ventures is a firm that entry point of which is looking at companies who are in product market fit. They're typically in revenue and they're in Series A or seed stage capital. Essentially we look at such things as upskilling and reskilling solutions for workers. You remember that skills gap I was talking about where, it's conspicuous that people with disabilities have overrepresentation in manual skills trades. I used to call this New Deal to Real Deal, that there are so many people with disabilities still in New Deal era training. And yet now we're seeing a revolution in digital technology that is allowing people to access skills training from home, remote, and flexibly. These are the kinds of solutions that people with disabilities invented, frankly, since 1990, have been asking for remote work and access to solutions from home. It is a rich irony that the rest of society enjoyed those benefits during the pandemic. It was people with disabilities that pioneered this demand for flexible work solutions. So we're also looking at work solutions that will identify talent wherever it lives and match it with employers who are in search of disability inclusive talent. We've seen two-sided marketplaces that are using AI and machine learning. And you hear a lot about this, Lori, about machine AI screening people out. And we're looking at products and solutions that are materially screening people in on the basis of their disability, on the basis of the built-up demand from employers to find disability diverse talent pipelines. We're looking at things like next generation captioning. Captioning has improved so much in recent years with tech innovation that it has a very high percentage accuracy. And here's the thing, Wall Street Journal the other week had on its front page that Gen Z prefers captioning whether they're deaf and hard of hearing or not. They're looking at content on multiple digital devices at once, and they want captioning and they demand it. This is what's next. We hear from enterprise employers all the time that when they deploy captioning at work, that it's the employees who aren't deaf and hard of hearing but have learning disabilities or have trouble taking notes or miss a moment and need to come back to their computer, and they have notes to be able to follow along. So these are turnkey commercialized solutions. They're way out of a medical lane that are accessible and available for people with disabilities. We're looking at digital assistants that understand dysartic speech and alternative speech patterns. When you think about it, if you've had a stroke or you have ALS or another type of disability, now cars are enabled by speech. Now any kind of digital assistant, refrigerators. And yet there is a whole group of people across the world that are locked out of those technologies because of their speech recognition technology. And yet what we find is when those solutions are deployed to market, they also deal with people with accents and people with other use of language. So there's universal design that has abundant and material benefits to the whole consumer market. We're seeing things like consumer apps like, that you would think is akin to Yelp, that tell somebody before you leave your house if a restaurant is architecturally accessible. My father had a lung transplant, but in the years preceding that operation, we lived in terror about leaving the house because we weren't sure when he was on oxygen if he needed to climb a flight of stairs to get into the restaurant. There's millions of people around the world that live every day with the anxiety of not being sure of their destination, whether it's a travel destination, a restaurant, a place of public accommodation, whether it's actually architecturally accessible. And yet there's this worldwide movement with founders to open source that information, to make sure it's correct, to give consumers this better customer service. And what we find when those types of solutions are deployed to market, people with baby strollers say thank you. People who are looking for any number of reasons for architectural accessibility are using these apps, or using these digital solutions. We're looking at brain-computer interface in the disability market now. Ways that, Ray Kurzweil, who's an inventor and an author who's talked about the singularity is near. The singularity between people and machines. Well, it's the disability community that continues to insist and inject values into the core of how technology is growing. That if people and machines become dependent, that the technology will neutralize differences where appropriate, but keep the core culture and value of disability at its heart, and the core social purpose and social benefit of keeping that technology inclusive and accessible. So that is a very quick, high-level understanding of what the market looks like these days.
Thank you, Gina. So we've got just a minute or two before we get to the audience, and I've got many more questions that I want to ask. I'm going to skip to one question that will hopefully serve the scholars and students from academia that are a part of this webinar and will be viewing this in the future. Acceptance of students with disabilities into higher ed institutions has been a long-standing challenge, as I understand it. You have named it a civil rights issue, and I would love to have your thoughts not only about this issue, but also about what you can see happening to the marketplace when students with disabilities begin to see Enable Ventures and the companies it invests in, and a broader movement here in bringing such visibility to the promise represented in their demographic. Do you have thoughts on that?
I do. And, I so far and so much lament that the most brilliant people I know with higher degrees in particularly MBA programs are also people I know because they're the named plaintiffs in civil rights actions to get access to their textbooks, to get access to the curriculum, to have accommodations in school. What we need to do is flip on its ear that if we want to build an inclusive economy and inclusive finance, that we have more people with disabilities at the table in investment firms, on investment committees. Not only that, but on corporate boards, in the C-suite of companies, making decisions at every level of the company about where disability should live in that company. I didn't mention this and I was remiss, but companies that have disability representation at every level have 30% higher profit margins. There is a real material benefit to disability, and there's a real material risk to companies and those in the economy that are not assessing, doing a risk calculus about whether disability is present and in leadership and throughout the life of a company. When we look at the state of MBA programs around the country, we need more students who are going to be our next leaders in impact and in closing the disability wealth gap in particular. And we need more access to higher education, not just as a matter of basic participation and basic legal compliance and accommodation, but we need a curriculum and an evaluation of this market and about the market opportunity where we can really understand and create the next generation of talent that will bring their lived experiences to the investment committee, bring their lived experiences to investment firms. And I think it's a real opportunity for the economy.
Certainly is. Let's look at some questions from the queue. Thane has gotten the most upvotes for his question, so we'll ask that first. Traditional funding mechanisms tend to disproportionately reward proposals for cutting-edge technology while overlooking low-tech solutions, even if they are novel, useful, and would be more accessible than, quote, smart-enabled products. Do you have any advice for companies with useful, accessible innovations who are running into the, quote, low-tech stigma during their fundraising process?
Well, I think that there are, we have seen founders who are identifying where disability lives, and there are many people who are trying to develop very low-cost solutions to serve the Global South, for instance. And in designing and iterating product, for instance, a smart home technology that's not internet enabled, but helps open the door, turn off the lights, open the drapes. These types of solutions are being designed because there is a recognition that technology is not always, too much technology is always not a panacea, that what we're trying to do is meet consumers in their needs and where they are with simplicity, and simplicity of design is always better. And so I think, we don't necessarily, as from an investment perspective, look at tech for tech's sake. We're looking at people at its core and what are the demands from the consumer base in terms of removing barriers in daily life.
Great. So Clint asks, what about the veteran disability population? What can be done to increase technology employment for this group?
Yes, and veterans are such a crucial part of the disability community, and so often forgotten or not talked about in the same discussions as the rest of the disability community. But certainly there is an enlivened and invigorated market for solutions for veterans that isn't sort of dealing with one issue or another. We've seen solutions in this marketplace for mental health, post-traumatic stress disorder, solutions that deal with wellness. We're seeing solutions that have to do with mobility. The future of mobility will be decided by entrepreneurs with disabilities and those working in concert with groups like veterans and other people with disabilities. We've seen such solutions coming out of the community that are solving for things like collision avoidance in wheelchairs, things like geospatial navigation and smart cities that are coordinated with software that has to do with mobility. And so all of these things reverberate to the benefit of groups that include veterans. And certainly we've seen veterans that are entrepreneurs who have tremendous potential and breakthrough ideas and an underemployment and need for solutions.
Jan is asking, please say a word about what people can do who want to join you in addressing the global disability wealth gap who do not qualify to become equity investors in Enable, so not accredited investors or institutional investors. How can we help? Jan asks.
Yes. And there are so many people from a spectrum of capital who who don't know about the world of opportunity that lives in the disability market, either for angel investing, for leveraging DAFs, donor advised funds, and philanthropic capital to make early stage pre-seed investments in early stage disability companies. The reason I say that is that the journey of entrepreneurship in the disability tech market begins with the need early on for de-risking, as these entrepreneurs are bridging the pioneer gap before product is commercial ready. And the unique philanthropic opportunity about that period in the entrepreneur's development is that in sending capital in search of risk to entrepreneurs that are pioneering that through that gap, you are essentially participating in that company's development as it's testing its fit with the disability community, as it's testing product market fit and efficacy of product before it's commercial ready. And there is such a profound demand from entrepreneurs for that early capital that it produces a very catalytic and incredible philanthropic opportunity early on. And Enable Ventures' entry point is after these companies are commercial ready. And we've done a lot of really catalytic work with SmartJob in ecosystem building and advising philanthropists and donors on how to send capital into really great companies that are still testing their product designs to get it right. And we think that's actually a very crucial development in the life of these companies as they're getting ready for market.
Mm-hmm. I'm also thinking that direct public offerings for early stage innovation companies could be a very good option, given that direct public offerings, which is something we've been looking at for Impact Entrepreneur, it allows for non-accredited investors to invest in an equity way at early stages. So this might be companies that are too early for you and your fund, but can both help the companies get off the ground and provide an investment opportunity for somebody who's not a accredited or institutional investor. Anyway, that's just a thought. Moving on to the next question, is a question from Anonymous saying, since this is an investor group, what are your thoughts about how disabled populations are kept artificially poor by virtue of the income and asset limitations that disability support legislation set on asset accumulation? It is better now with able accounts, but still there is disparity and potential loss of high value benefits if disabled people work more and earn more. This means the huge loss of productivity you referenced, but also permanently being confined to a low income status. No opportunity for them to invest in their own inclusive economies through the kinds of ventures you are discussing, and for them to be clients of investment firms. That seems like a question right up your
yes, it's a very important question. And, this is let me just say, this is a nonpartisan issue, that these asset limits that are placed on people with disabilities are so artificially low. And it's universally regarded in the disability community that this is a false choice between my health and my wealth, because essentially there is a sometimes confirmed fear of losing access to healthcare as a result of earning above a profoundly low asset limit in federal legislation. Now, the important thing to recognize, and this person references the ABLE Act, which was a true breakthrough piece of legislation that allows people with disabilities to maintain savings in savings accounts called ABLE accounts. But the important thing to understand is we as a community need to arm entrepreneurs with information and access to social networks of other entrepreneurs who have been able to both continue to access healthcare and understand how in a coordinated fashion they can earn and save and drive their companies towards a success level that will afford them access to employer-paid healthcare without a Hobson's choice about removing access to public programs that are necessary and relative to health. One of the things that is most abundantly clear is that people have lacked access historically to benefits counseling services, which is a crucial frontline service to say, look, here's the asset limit, but this is what you can do to plan and save. And when you exceed X amount of income, you will be able to convert your company into an employer-paid healthcare that can follow along with the following public benefits programs in the following way. What we're about is building wealth. Our entrepreneurs are preaching the gospel of sort of the careful rebellion that is entrepreneurship, that is saying, you know how there is, if you can't beat us, join us. I meet so many entrepreneurs every day that say, if you can't join us, beat us, meaning that they've been excluded from traditional avenues of employment, and they're charting their own path. And they have found ways to break through some of these poverty traps that are inherent and sort of endemic in current federal legislation. And there are proposals to change asset limits. And you hope that there will be some breakthrough at some point in the near future relative to that particular poverty trap.
Jan's earlier question also put me to mind of kind of ESG and ESG investing and ESG in big public corporations. And I'm wondering if you can comment on disability as an integral part of the S in ESG, to the extent that it is not really an integral part for many companies as investors, as you and others and me might wish. How can that be changed? And what is the broader employment potential of the ESG space, both, well, I guess both from a public and private markets perspective? Can you comment on that?
Yes. Well, you know, I mentioned to you, Lori, that companies that have disability presence throughout the company, I think it's important to say throughout the company, because we so often see people with disabilities onboarded into companies, into positions in the mailroom or positions at the entry-level retail. But we're really advocating for people with disabilities representation from the C-suite down, every level of the company. But when we see that presence, Accenture did a report a couple of years ago that actually established that there are, in fact, 30% higher profit margins, that there's real materiality here, that there's a link between disability and the business case. There's also a link between disability and the risk evaluation that companies need to have. But there, a couple of years ago in 2020, NASDAQ had a DEI, had a rule about board representation. And the rule in 2020 very conspicuously left disability out of the conversation about governance. And this was in an ESG framework. And you're thinking this is 2022, and then it was 2020. And yet we still don't quite have disability on everyone's front page on the dinner plate, and when we're talking about ESG, and we need to. And going back to those comments at the top about how intersectional, how deeply intersectional disability is with other social identities, race, gender, et cetera, that we need to get real people at the center of our investment strategy and our evaluation of corporate value. And real people come in multiple social identities at a time. But in terms of materiality and an investment perspective in the ESG conversation, real people have reverberating benefits to the business case and to driving profit and purpose in the public markets as well.
Well, thank you for that answer. We are at time. And for those of you who missed any part of this webinar, or like me, would like to watch it again, there's so much really interesting information that's passed along here. The program will be available in our members archive in the next day or two. If you're not a premium member and like to watch it again, simply email me and I will send you the link and password to restream it. Here in the web, in the chat is my email address. As I also noted in the chat, we have a very busy calendar coming up. We have can't miss programs the next 3 Thursdays. Next Thursday, we welcome the legendary founder of Acumen, Jacqueline Novogratz, for a Luminarius Fireside Chat, which is called Moral Imagination, Patient Capital, and Their Roles in Solving Big Problems. The following Thursday, we welcome Paul Katz, and he's the founder of Entertain Impact for a program called Bridging the Gap Between Entertainment and the Impact Economy. And then the following Thursday, I think that's the 17th, we welcome the one and only Jim Sorensen, who's come up a couple times in this webinar, founder of the Sorensen Impact Group, for a Luminarius webinar entitled Building a Vibrant Impact Ecosystem. I've put in the web a link to our calendar where all these programs are described. You might want to bookmark that. I would also strongly recommend that you sign up for our newsletters, as that's an important way we keep our members and readers updated about new magazine content as well as upcoming live programs. And for those of you who are not premium members, don't delay. I just put in the link and also a code that you can use to get 20% off annual membership, premium membership, if you act today. Anyway, that's all. Gina, thank you so much for sharing your work on closing the disability wealth gap with us today. Truly inspiring work, and I wish you the very best.
Thank you so much, Lori, for inviting me. It's such a privilege to be here. Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. Hope to see many, if not all of you, next week for the next program. In the meantime, take care and stay safe. Bye now.